and that you will faithfully and well discharge the duties of the office upon which you are about to enter. So help you God.
I do.
The first session of the 110th Congress convened on January 4th. The Democrats won the House of Representatives majority for the first time in 12 years. California Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi was elected Speaker of the House. She is the first woman to hold the position in U.S. history.
I accept this gavel in the spirit of partnership, not partisanship. And I look forward to working. Where's the leader? In this House, we may be different parties, but we serve one country.
Pelosi has a difficult road ahead of her. Ties between the Democrats and Republicans have worsened significantly due to differing opinions on the war in Iraq. As House Speaker, Pelosi will have to help the two parties consolidate and urge the Bush administration to seek alternate solutions and pursue a different foreign policy direction.
Congratulations, you are all now members of the 110th Congress.
The new Democrat-controlled House has proposed the first 100-hour agenda. The Democrats took over leadership of the House at the end of last year. It was the first time since 1994 that the party won a majority in both the House and the Senate. The Democrats plan to push through 6 major bills while ensuring that the Republicans take responsibility for the war in Iraq. The change in leadership will usher in a new era for the Bush administration.
Welcome to this week's edition of Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Chi-Chen Lo. Joining us today is Professor Donald Rodgers from Austin College in Texas. Professor Rodgers, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
The Republicans lost both the Congress and the Senate. And how will that affect the U.S. policy, foreign policy in particular?
We're not sure yet. Certainly there are going to be some further discussions about foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, the neoconservative agenda, the sort of aggressive agenda that the U.S. has had. While the Republicans controlled Congress, there was very little investigation, little discussion, little questioning of the policy. But now the Democrats have control. Certainly they're going to start asking a lot more questions of the Republicans and putting more pressure on the Republicans to justify their actions.
But there have been reports about the so-called neocons' future. Are they losing their support in the U.S. policy circles?
Absolutely, they are losing their support. And many people who were perceived to be neoconservative supporters have now backpedaled and said, that's not what I meant. When I talked about a democratic agenda, the victory of democracy in the world, I didn't mean that should be an aggressive foreign policy, a militaristic foreign policy. And so the attitude is changing very much, and the neoconservatives are certainly losing some of their influence in the policy now.
For the past 6 years, there have been discussions about the competition for the making of foreign policy. Sometimes Pentagon is making a policy, and sometimes the State Department. Who's now, making the final, foreign policy?
It's an interesting question because the Bush administration, and with Vice President Cheney and Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, those people have always been strong supporters of a very strong presidency, an imperial presidency. And so the president has had, we've seen an increase in presidential power over the last few years, to be sure. With the loss of Congress now, and with the difficulties we're experiencing in Iraq, there has been, again, more questioning about whether the president should have so much control. How much influence the Pentagon has is questionable as well, because there has been great military questioning and opposition to our policies in the Middle East, for example. And while President Bush claims that he listens to his generals and listens to his commanders, often he'll listen to them, but he's not really taking their advice. I hear what you're saying, but that doesn't mean I'm going to change the way I'm doing things. So once again, with the change in congressional control, I think more oversights coming up, and I think that some of that will change, and Congress will certainly start to reassert its authority in foreign policy decision-making.
Speaking of Middle East, the so-called Iraq Study Group report just released. How do you read the findings of the report?
I read the findings much like the news has been reporting it, that the situation on the ground in Iraq is much more difficult than we were originally told, although it was anticipated by many people, including many of the military commanders, that this was going to be a difficult situation. We are in, the word that nobody wants to use is a quagmire. We are in a quagmire in Iraq, and certainly the stay-the-course policy was not working. So we heard President Bush and his administration start to change their language very quickly, and they officially announced we're no longer using stay the course. So we're going to adapt to win is the new strategy. And the adapt to win strategy is something that the study group came out with to some extent But I think really the study group's findings pointed more toward a way to withdraw. And we're still not seeing any clear indication from the Bush administration that they want to talk about withdrawal. In fact, we have the surge now, increasing troop movements into Iraq. And just the other day, President Bush was asked about when are we going to get out. Some of the military commanders started pointing to certain dates specific, and President Bush immediately said, we don't want to give any dates. That only helps the enemy. So I don't know that the Iraq Study Group report is really going to make that much of a difference in policy in the immediate sense. But maybe, again, as the Democratic Congress starts to assert its authority, put more pressure on the White House, we may see some backfilling.
Does the Bush administration have any exit strategy in Iraq, or is there anyone?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think there is an exit strategy. And I think it's very interesting because former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld particularly has always been one who's adamant about the notion of if you're going to go in, you better go in with an exit strategy.
That's right.
But we haven't seen any clear-cut exit strategy there and no clear definition of what victory means. And so they've set themselves, I think they've put themselves in a very awkward position, to be quite blunt, because the exit strategy is non-existent, the definition of victory is non-existent at the present time, and it seems rather clear that even we're going to have to pull back. We're going to have to withdraw eventually, and I don't think that things on the ground are going to get any better in Iraq. So it's going to leave the next administration in quite a difficult situation.
Another issue that is surfacing is the Iran nuclear ambition.
Right.
How do you see the handling of this issue on the part of the U.S. government?
I think the United States is uncertain about how to deal with Iran. We have had very aggressive language, of course, in dealing with Iran in recent months. We have been much more assertive in our language even than we have been with North Korea and their nuclear testing. And, of course, we attribute much of the insurgent behavior in Iraq to Iranian support and influence. So we're tying those two issues together. It's not only the Iranian nuclear issue, but it's also Iranian support for the insurgency in Iraq. I think that we will continue to use strong diplomatic language against Iran, but I don't know that there's anything else we can really do. We certainly are not in a position to extend our troops even further, to use military pressure in Iran, to extend troop movement into that area, and I think that we know that if we were to try to use military force in Iran, that regionally that would be a disaster. That would it would spark a regional conflict, I think. So I don't know how much we can do, honestly.
But do you agree that the reason why the Bush administration lost the midterm election was simply because the Iraq situation?
I think it was the Iraq situation somewhat directly, somewhat indirectly. President Bush, right now, they haven't had any real policy successes since coming into office. You know, when he got reelected last time, he was going to push for the reform of the Social Security system in the United States, and that fell flat. Health care reform has not gone well for them. Economic policy has been mixed. It depends on who you talk to. So any of the policy successes, domestic policy successes they were striving for have not come through, and in the meantime the Iraq situation is drawing so much attention and is not going well, and I think too much of President Bush's attention, the Bush administration's attention, has had to have been focused on Iraq. So certainly altogether the Iraq situation was the primary reason that the Congress went over to the Democrats.
But do you think that Bush administration's preoccupation with the Iraq issue or the Middle East issue distract the government's attention to other regions, including Asia? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, there is no doubt about it. I think that everything else seems to become a second thought at the present time. And in an odd way, even policy toward Asia, policy toward Africa, we still seem to be looking at it in the context of the broader war on terror. So through that lens of the war on terror, and of course the primary area of that war on terror right now is Iraq. So all attention is either diverted to Iraq or funneled through what's happening in Iraq. And so our foreign policy, we don't hear much about other regions in the news anymore. And I don't think that the administration is really talking about other regions as much as they should be at the present time, because there's so much attention on Iraq. So we have, the North Korea situation, the rise of China, all those other issues. While they touch on them, they're not giving as much attention as perhaps they deserve at the present time.
How do you evaluate so far the Bush administration's policy towards North Korea?
I think that the Bush administration's policy toward North Korea, there's not an easy answer to that situation. The North Korean regime is a difficult one to deal with, of course. It is a regime that is always on the brink of collapse.
Yeah.
And that regime, the
But that had been said, it's, earlier, maybe in the 1990s.
Always, it's always going to die, same with Castro, right? And so, and they never go away. The North Korean regime, though, is not a regime that is easily persuaded. And so there's not often much you can do. I think increased dialogue is still always the best option with North Korea. And so I don't know that the Bush administration's policy with North Korea has been terrible, but I do think the Bush administration has been overly reliant on China in dealing with North Korea. I am not persuaded that China has as much influence on North Korea as many people believe. If you look at North Korean propaganda, starting really after the death of Mao and going into the 80s and the economic reforms, the North Korean official propaganda of North Korea has labeled China as a revisionist state, as a capitalist rotor state. And so the official propaganda going out to the public is that China's not an enemy, to be sure, but China's not as good a friend as they once were. When you have a regime like the Kim Jong-il regime that's struggling for survival, doing anything to hold on, they will do anything to hold on, including alienating China.
That's right.
So using China as the primary bargainer in that may not be the answer. Having said that, though, I don't know what the other answer is either. I don't know that there's an easy answer.
But let's put aside China's real influence over North Korea. How about China's intention? Do you think China is helping the U.S. or out of good intention, or is helping their own?
They're concerned about themselves. Of course, the Chinese, while they are officially an ally of North Korea, are no happier with North Korean behavior than the United States or any other country, because North Korea's behavior threatens a regional conflict, and China is not interested at the present time in getting involved in a regional conflict. And of course, if North Korea sparks a conflict with the South or with Japan, China has to be pulled to one side or the other, and that's not a choice they want to make, and they do not right now, while they're, of course, expanding their military dramatically, and while they're improving their military technology, that does not mean they want to become involved in a conflict at the present time. So they're uncomfortable with North Korea as well. And their goal, their intention is not to help the United States or help Japan, but to help themselves, to keep themselves out of a difficult situation with the North Koreans. So they try to use their powers of persuasion over North Korea to tell North Korea to take it easy. Don't do much.
But if the U.S. wants to solve the problem by itself, do you think that you should use more sticks or carrots?
With North Korea, I think that I think right now the carrot may be the better option with the North Koreans. The stick, because of the situation the regime is in, an extremely paranoid government at the present time, and with some justification, the sense that there's an enemy on every corner. I think that the more opportunity we give them to use the propaganda that says they're attacking us, the more opportunity we give them to say the United States or Japan is being aggressive against us, the more it allows the regime to persuade the people within North Korea that military conflict is an option. On the other hand, North Korea, of course, goes back and forth on whether they want help. We make agreements where we're going to send them food or send them assistance, and then they don't want it after a certain point. So it's just a difficult situation. But I don't think the stick is going to work at all, to be honest.
Do you think that six-party talks is a failure, or it's an effective mechanism for solving the problem?
I think it has not been as successful as we hoped it would be, but I think right now it's the only option we have. I think it's the only. Of course, the North Koreans would prefer just to negotiate with the United States bilaterally. But I think that would be unfair to the other countries in the region. I think it's particularly South Korea. Yeah,
but some people argue that the North Korean regime is using the six-party talks to buy time.
Of course.
And time would be on their side.
Yes.
Do you think that is a correct assessment?
I think that's absolutely true. The North Korean regime does two things typically. They use the bargaining to buy time. The second thing is they bargain through uncertainty. You can never guess which direction they're going to go next. Today they're shaking your hand, patting you on the back, and promising to be friends, and the next day they test a nuclear device. And so that is the way they negotiate. That's the way they do things. And they are certainly buying time. But again, what's our option? I think a military option obviously is out of the question. We cannot afford to go into a full-blown military conflict on the Korean Peninsula. We do not want to draw. That would create a regional war. And so I don't know that there's any other option besides the six-party talks, and we just have to hope that through the negotiations, through the discussions, that some option can be found that would make everybody happy.
The rise of China has been a very important issue for countries in the region, and also for the United States. So when we come back, we will talk about the bilateral relationship between the U.S. and China.
Okay.
Let's take a short break and stay with us.